Good evening, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. I hope you're all doing very well tonight. I am here playing Golgari once more for you. Just can't get enough of this deck. The interaction in Modern is not always seen on either side of the table, but there remain some very powerful incentives to play an interactive strategy in Modern, and this straight black-green one might just be the best one of them all. It's certainly the most fun if you ask me. So, we're here, we are on the draw, and we have a pretty well-balanced 7. We have 2 threats, which is nice. We have 1 to play on turn 2, and 1 to carry us into the late game. Our interaction is a little bit on the light side, but at least it can be anything we need it to be. 4 lands is a bit heavy, but with Tireless Tracker involved, as well as multiple repeated triggers for that card, I'm certainly not going to complain. This hand could get run over. We're accepting that risk against a really fast deck where Brutality does not quite cripple them, but apart from that, it is a snap keep and should be pretty good against most things. So our opponent will mulligan. Our opponent will mulligan again, and they will keep 5. Okay. Already feeling better. They lead on a Mutavault into an Ether Vial. Okay. So, I always try to figure out what the opposing deck is on turn 1. If you've seen me play other matches on this channel, you know that. And sometimes it's like, some people might be thinking, why do you waste your time? Just play on and see what they have. You're not going to do anything on turn 1 anyway. Here, it really matters, and I'll tell you why. Well, first, let's take our draw step, just to make sure that doesn't change our plans. Yes, it does not change our plans. So, the opposing deck leading on Mutavault, playing Ether Vial, that could mean Merfolk. It could mean Death and Taxes. It could mean some other decks, if people are playing some kind of off-color tribal brew, Mutavault and Ether Vial is not a bad place to start. Maybe Slivers, something like that. So a lot of these decks have similar curves and similar strategies, at least broadly. So why does it matter that I figure out which one it is now, or at least that I think about it? Well, specifically if this is Merfolk, which I have a lot of experience against, one of the worst things that can happen to us on the draw is getting our turn 1 land spreading seized. Now, with our hand, it's not going to cripple us or anything like that. We've got plenty of other lands, but we still don't want to give them that clean spreading seize because they could have multiple ones in hand, and then it could be an issue locking us off of green, at least for a little while. And it could also be their only card that makes sense to run out on turn 2. Because they did take a pretty heavy mulligan. So for both of those reasons, if it's Merfolk, we don't want to present a spreading seas target. So normally, we would run out the Blooming Marsh if we were sure this wasn't Merfolk. Like if they went Plains Ether Vial, I would be fine to play the Blooming Marsh. So that would save Verdant Catacombs for our Tireless Tracker where we want it. However, we have to play around the fact that it could be Merfolk and they could have spreading seas. So for that reason, we get to run out the Verdant Catacombs and pass. This also has the minor upside of being able to end step for an Overgrown Tomb, just making our mana a little less painless against what is certainly some kind of an aggressive deck. That much we know for sure. Island, Mutavault. Now I guess this still could be, Spirits or some kind of white-blue taxes deck, something like this, but it's looking more and more like Merfolk. They take an attack with Mutavault, so that tells me one of 2 things. Number 1, it tells me that my read was correct and they have a spreading seas, and that was their only real proactive play on turn 2. Or it tells me that they are land flooded and they don't care if we fatal push their Mutavault, because that was a risk that they just took. Again, they did take a pretty heavy mulligan, so keep that in mind, but things to consider. Alright, we're continuing to draw lands now. Let's just take a moment to admire this beauty. This card makes everything okay. It makes the flood A-okay, so I am not worried whatsoever. just get to run out the Blooming Marsh, run out the Tarmogoyf. Now, Tarmogoyf is an amazing card. This is one of the worst matchups for Tarmogoyf. They play a Merfolk Trickster, which can flash in to make it a 0/1 until end of turn, which is effectively a kill spell, provided the Goyf is attacking or blocking. They also play sometimes up to 4 Relic of Progenitus in their sideboard, so this is not a matchup where good old Tarmogoat shines. Now, they do have a Spreading Seas. That doesn't necessarily mean my read was correct. They could have just top-decked it, but man, I feel good about playing around that card. That would have been way better for them on turn 2 than getting in for 2 damage. Draw Fatal Push. That's a good draw. That's a very good draw. We already have a land in the graveyard, so there's no way to grow the Tarmogoyf any bigger quite yet, so we just have to get in for 1. I don't care if they have a blocker to Violin. I have the option to Fatal Push it, and, Tarmogoyf, again, is not that highly valued by me in this particular matchup. We played out the Field of Ruin there because, of course, we can hit a Mutavault here. Even if they didn't fire it up, we probably would have on the end step. They're going to fire one up, then they're going to play a Curse Catcher. I'm just going to take that Mutavault off the field right now. Get a Swamp. They've only got 2 cards in hand. We could Fatal Push the Curse Catcher, but I don't feel obligated to quite yet. We're still pretty far ahead. We're enormously far ahead, let me correct myself, on resources. So we're just going to continue pulling way, way far ahead. We just have to have this one more turn of kind of tapping out to develop our board, and then from here it's going to should be pretty clear sailing. We get to fire off the Inquisition. I don't necessarily expect it to be good because they have Vial, but it's not going to get any better as the game goes on, so we might as well cast it now. And they are certainly flooded, so that read was correct. Unfortunate for our opponent, to be sure, taking a mulligan to 5 and then being on the receiving end of a pretty harsh flood. They did at least have a couple Mutavaults to mitigate the severity of the flood, but we've got the tools to answer them pretty cleanly in the form of Field of Ruins and Fatal Pushes. So we get to pass, and we are quite confident here. There's not a whole lot that they're going to have game 1. They would need to just rip Silvergill Adepts into Spreading Seas over and over. They would just need to keep cantripping and getting value out of the draws. That's really what they need to keep up with us. And even then, they're just not going to keep up with the tracker. Look at this value. It's insane. There's no need to get too fancy with your fetch land activations and so on in this deck. That's one reason the mana base is so nice. We have enough basics where you can just go get a basic. We're just making sure we get, no matter what happens, we get our tireless tracker value. And it does not make our mana any worse, and it doesn't make our life total any worse. I almost consider this like a Planeswalker activation. You know how often you will, first thing on a turn, just activate your Planeswalker to make sure that they can't bounce it or remove it in response and you didn't get value out of it that turn. Treat the tracker the same way. Make your land drop first thing most of the time. Time to send in the goons. There's no reason not to. We have a couple Fatal Pushes in hand. That was another great draw. So any tricks they have, we are able to answer pretty well. They're not going to offer a block here, so we're going to crack one clue. And we're going to find another land. Now here I'm going to just take an opportunity to Collective Brutality, the Curse Catcher. This card is actually fantastic in the matchup as almost literally just a removal spell. Like, the Drain is a nice way to pitch excess lands if we're not turning them into cards with Tireless Tracker. Since we are, of course, we don't want to do that. But this card kills, I believe, every single Merfolk, provided there are not any Anthem effects. It kills their 4-drop Master of Waves. It kills their 3-drop Marrow Regere. It kills their Lords. It kills their Weenies. This card kills everything. So On the face of it, you might be like, oh, Brutality, all three modes are good, right? It's a blue deck, so you can spot check for counter magic. It's an aggro tempo deck, so draining them is relevant. And then maybe the removals are sometimes relevant too. That's all true, but really this is just actually a fantastic removal spell. By far, that's first and foremost what this is in this matchup. That said, we're going to fire it off on a low priority target here, just so we can continue using our mana efficiently. That's our only sorcery speed removal in the hand. Opponent tries to trick us into paying one. We don't, and we pass. Opponent's got to find some good stuff here. They find a Master of Waves, which they probably feel pretty good about. It's not a very high value one, but the Spreading Seas does indeed count toward Devotion. So they get a couple jumpers, and we just spent our collective Brutality, so it seems like one of our outs to it at least is gone from their perspective, but we have Fatal Pushes in hand, and this is just another way that Tireless Tracker is completely amazing because clues provide a really clean way to get a Revolt trigger. And we're not going to mess around, we're just going to clear the way, make sure nothing happens first. And then we're going to get in. It's not quite lethal yet, but we're pretty darn close. Opponent's got nothing to say, they're going to go down to 2, they're dead a million different ways. We'll play a manland, so we make them dead 1,000,001 different ways. And now we get to pass with Clue and Fatal Push held up. Opponent will Vapor Snag our Tireless Tracker, sure. And then they have a Wanderwind Hub. Okay, they're just dead on board. No reason not to crack our Clue, so we will, but yeah, we've just got a handful of gas. Like, an absurd, ridiculous amount of gas. So, we fire up the Ape Village, and the opponent scoops it up. Now, they did take them all to 5, and they did flood out, so we cannot read too much into that game. Merfolk is actually kind of a tough matchup, and it's one that you need to really know how to navigate well. I will say that straight Golgari, specifically this 25 land build, is a lot better off against Merfolk than most BGX decks. If you think of Jund and Abzan, they can Spreading Seas you out of the game a lot more readily. And if you think of Dark Confidant builds, Merfolk can tempo you out of the game pretty well. Like with Island Walk and the Lords, they often can do like 12 damage with a decent sequence without you being able to do much about it. And if you've had Defection Shock a time or two and maybe a Bob trigger takes you that much lower, then Merfolk can just really tempo you out of the game. The fact that BG Rock has a more streamlined mana base, has more lands in general, and does not lose life to Dark Confidant means that our matchup against Merfolk is much better than any other BGX variant, in my opinion. While Jund does have some good tools, you know, Kolagan's Command can be nice against Ether Vial, Lightning Bolt is great against Merfolk, I still think that our specific variant is best positioned against the fish out of all the BG decks in the format. That said, we still need to sideboard carefully and bring our A game because we cannot rely on them mulling to 5 again. So let's go to the sideboard and see how we tech up against the fishies. Alright everybody, we are here looking at our sideboard, trying to catch some fish here. So what do we need? What do we need? So right off the bat, Engineered Explosives. This card is an all-star. It comes in. They have so many permanents clustered around the 2 slot, it's not even funny. This is going to hit the vast majority of their creatures along with their Spreading Seas. It's really, really nice. In weird situations, it can also hit 3 against Merfolk because they do sometimes kindly provide us with a 3rd color of mana. That said, that's a very, very, very corner case. They don't even play too many 3-drops at all. It's basically just Marrow Regiray, which is not even an auto-include, and sometimes Vendilion Click. Those are the major 3-drops. So this is almost always going to be fired off on 2. Even on 1, it's pretty respectable against certain progressions. Can hit it like an Ether Vial and a Curse Catcher. That's a fine 2 for 1. Nile Spellbomb does nothing. They do not utilize the grave. So, Fulminator Mage, also not the matchup for you, for sure. This is our no pile. I like Maelstrom Pulse. This is a matchup that provides you with a lot of 2-for-1s because they play a lot of 4-ofs. That's basically it. And we just want as many removal spells as possible, period. So, Maelstrom Pulse is a for sure in. Don't fall into the trap. I've seen this happen a surprising amount of time on camera. So, Merfolk player is going wide. They play a massive Master of Waves, right? And the Master of Waves makes like 8 tokens. And the BGX player is like, well, I better draw a Maelstrom Pulse or I'm dead. They draw the Pulse. Great, wonderful, beautiful. And they hit the tokens with it. Don't do that. Hit the Master of Waves with it. It's going to kill all the tokens anyway. Now, if they have 2 Master of Waves, maybe that's a different story. No, it's not actually, because they both die to the Maelstrom Pulse anyway. So yeah, always hit the Master of Waves. Another thing to note about this card is do not hit the phantasmal image of whatever you're trying to hit, because that will be sacrificed in response, and then Maelstrom Pulse will fizzle because it no longer has a legal target when it attempts to resolve. So if they make a phantasmal image of Lord of Atlantis, hit the real Lord, not the imposter, with the Maelstrom Pulse. Just a couple things to know about that card in this matchup. I like Golgari Charm here. It can definitely be a 2 or more for 1. They do play a lot of X1s, so, you know, if they have a Lord, this is no longer live, but we have so many forms of spot removal that we can realistically keep them off of Lords and get a 2-for-1 at some point with this, or more. They have Curse Catcher, they might play Mistcaller, they have Master of Waves is even a 2-1, along with all of its tokens, of course. Silvergill Adept is a 2-1. They have a surprising number of X1s. This card can also be a nice little blowout against a Spreading Seas. If we are mono-screwed by the seas, you know, this requires green-black. We might not quite be able to get there, although again, with our very friendly mana base, we still maybe can. But this is more of a combat trick where if they, you know, they kind of have to play around removal anyway, so they might be wary of this, but if they have an Island Walk granting Lord and they send the whole team in, we can take them off of Island Walk before blocks and potentially gobble up some of their attackers, because our stuff is usually bigger, if nothing else. So, and then of course Regen is also kind of a combat trick that they might not be able to play around. Again, not very relevant, but it could be in some universe. I could see that happening. So I like Golgari Charm a lot. While this is going to probably be a grindy matchup post-side, it's not the type of grindy matchup where we want Nissa. She's hard to protect because they're evasive. They're not actively putting our permanents in the graveyard. In fact, they might bring in a big pile of relics. So, she is a grindy card, but she's not for every grindy matchup. And with these type of linear, evasive creature decks that don't play a lot of kill spells or anything like that, we don't want the Nissa. Same deal with Obstinate Baloth. The life gain's okay, it's an okay body, an okay rate, but we just cannot rely on this card to block the Island Walkers, so I don't like it here. Now, I do like Choke, and I'll tell you why. So, this is not a matchup where we can say, haha, you're choked, I resolved a choke, it's all over, you're dead. They play a Boro Palace in the Clouds, they play Minamo School at Water's Edge. Our specific opponent has shown us Wanderwine Hub, so they have a lot of blue sources that do not get choked out. They can also play through Ether Vial, potentially, even if they are choked. That said, I expect our opponent will side out Ether Vials against us, at least some number of them, if not all. So that is one fewer tool they have in their toolbox against a choke. We also have, it's a really weird progression if it ends up going this way, but we can potentially hit their non-basic blue sources with cards like Field of Ruin and Assassin's Trophy to make choke even better. That said, like a lot of our other cards that come in from the side, we don't need them to be huge blowouts, right? We don't need these cards to be huge blowouts, we just need them to be decent, and we just need choke to be decent. For that reason, I think it comes in. That said, maybe you just want as much removal as humanly possible. I could see leaving this out, so I'll put it here in the maybe board, but I did bring it in for this matchup. We want all of our creature removal, that is for sure, and our Kalitas for the creature matchups, who just kind of takes over the game. If you can resolve him and then go back to interacting, the game will just end. I talked in Game 1 about how good Collective Brutality is. We certainly want the third. And we are not interested in Duress. We are definitely not interested in Surgical. So, we've got 7 cards for sure. I brought in the Choke for the 8th. Let's see what we don't like. So, Liliana of the Veil is an interesting one. Merfolk are the type of... If you saw my previous video against the allies, I kind of consider Merfolk to be in a similar category where they're almost borderline mid-range. They're not a linear hyper aggro deck. They're a deck that is a creature deck that employs a pretty linear strategy in terms of how they win the game, but they can grind. They're going to get grindier post side. And they don't play a ton of throwaway creatures, but they also don't play a zero number of those. So I like shaving one Liliana. She's pretty bad against, like, Master of Waves with a bunch of tokens, obviously. But she's pretty good if we're disrupting heavily and then land her on curve and cleanly edict a decent value card and then go back to doing Lily things the following turns. So I can see trimming one. I think that's correct. This is our arguably best card in the matchup. Remember how I said how many X1s they play? Well, she's going to knock them down for fun and tick up while doing so. And she, of course, always has the option to tick down if that makes sense. And she's a win condition, too. So, incredible, incredible card. What else do we not like? All of the stuff is frankly fine. This is the type of matchup where our removal is so good that I want to cut a threat because we brought one in. I want my interactive cards to stay in as high numbers as possible. So, what don't we like? We could consider shaving a Tasigur because they could relic us out of a graveyard and or bounce him, and that is a little sketchy. This is also probably the literal only matchup in Modern where I would consider shaving a Tarmogoyf just because it dies to Merfolk Trickster. Like, even if you have a full graveyard, your Tarmogoyf obviously has to attack or block. That's all it does. So the instant you attack or block with it, they point the Trickster at it after assigning a block or after you assign a block, and that just becomes a kill spell that leaves behind a 2/2 body. And that's very, very bad for us. So you could shave a Tasigur, you could shave a Tarmogoyf. That's kind of up to you. I'm just gonna do the Tarmogoyf because I think that's what I did in this matchup. But as blasphemous as it is, again, this is the actual only matchup where I think you can cut a Goyf over another threat if you want to cut a threat. What else do we not like? Literally everything else is fantastic. This is a matchup where Abrupt Decay is just about strictly better than Trophy, the only exception being it can hit Master of Waves. That's basically it. Or a land, to be fair, but that's not usually what we want to do. So we've got no choice but to kind of get rid of the discard. And I don't mind doing that because discard can be pretty nice against Merfolk early game, but it rapidly loses its utility. They can empty their hand in response to mid-game discard with flash creatures, with Ether Vial activations, and I don't think them bringing in counter magic against us is very good. Like, they might do it. It's not terrible. It might be their best option with their 75, but it's not like I desperately need to spot check for counter magic. And if I do, I'll still have 3 copies of Brutality that I can do that with. So, do we cut all 6? Oh, the other thing I'll quickly mention about discard, you kind of have to leave some in if you're on Jundar Absent because you need to take away the Spreading Seas before they hit you with it. We don't have that problem. We've got 25 lands and a 2-color mana base. Spreading Seas is still very, very good against us, but it's not a must answer before it comes down. So we could take out all 6, that's viable. I'm going to get cute and just leave one in and cut an Assassin's Trophy. It's, again, when we bring in these big piles of removal, I often end up cutting away just one trophy. Maybe that means I have one too many removal spells overall in my 75. I might have to re-examine that in the future. But for now, we're just going to be cute and leave in one Inquisition. Why not? So let's take a look at this beautiful spread. We are so teched out against Merfolk. And of course, this is not because Merfolk is big in the meta, quite the opposite. We are teched out with other decks in mind, but because we play some generalists like Explosives and Pulse, and even Choke is surprisingly broad in the meta, at least broader than people think. The Third Brutality, these are all generalists that make us very well equipped against a deck like this. So let's go to game 2, see how our choices treat us. Okay, everybody, we are back for game 2. We're going to be on the draw, and our hand is pretty poor. It's kind of cute that we get to play around Spreading Seas and all that, but one lander is pretty unkeepable, and it's not even all that great. Like, we have too many threats. We want more lands, and we want more interaction. 2 pieces of interaction in the opener is sufficient, but all these threats, we're just asking to get tempoed out of the game. We're just asking to get land screwed, whether we don't draw them or we get seized out, and we just are asking to do nothing and die with that hand, with a lot of gas in hand as they island walk to the win. The opponent will keep 7 this time, no more mulligans for them. We have to mulligan, and this is much better. This is much, much better. We've got a couple Fatal Push, we've got our late game value train ready to roll. We see a 4th land on top. Sweet, I'm happy to keep that with a tracker around. I'm not going to say no to that. Opponent will lead off on Mutavault, and they'll pass. Okay. Unfortunately, we cannot play around the Spreading Seas this time, so we have no choice but to run out our Hissing Quagmire. If we really wanted to try to keep this around, we could run out Swamp, but Quagmire with Death Touch, just a 2/2. Again, they're island walking. It's just not all that relevant. I would rather just get our tap land out of the way. Not going to lose any sleep if they seize it. Fortunately, they do not, but Silvergill Adept is very, very, very good against us. This is arguably the best card in the deck to begin with. It's a very simple, innocuous-looking card, but just the fact that it's a somewhat aggressive body stapled to draw a card in the context of their deck with all the lords and all the evasion, card is great. Card is great. And see, if they had played anything that didn't draw a card, I would be happy to just Fatal Push it, but that feels terrible, Fatal Pushing that, so we're just passing. That said, we do want to stay ahead on board, so we might be interested in a push coming up here. They showed us another Adept with that first Adept. Now they'll play the second Adept, and they show us a Harbinger of Tides. So we will have to bear that one in mind. So let's look at what we're going to do our next turn. Assuming we don't draw anything else, I think we're pretty happy to just play the Tireless Tracker out. Now, often you don't want to play the Tracker on turn 3 because you don't want to risk her dying without getting you any value. That said, I am inclined to risk her for 2 reasons. Number 1, they're a mono blue deck. They don't have much removal. Maybe a couple Dismembers are the only things that could be in their 75 that hit Tireless Tracker. Unless they're going to double gut shot her, in which case, okay, fine with me. The other reason is that we are a little bit under the gun. We need to use our mana efficiently. We didn't use our mana efficiently on turn 2, and we've kind of got to use it efficiently on turn 3 to stay in the game and not get tempoed out. Along those lines, we're also going to Fatal Push the attacker, even though it represents card advantage for them. They traded 1-for-1 Adept for push, and they have a card in hand to show for it. We still just can't let them go too wide too soon, especially because we are not going to probably take a block with this Tireless Tracker. We drew a Tasigur. That's going to prove useful at some point, but right now it kind of just adds a little bit more clunk to our hand. Wanderwine Hub is revealing the Harbinger once again. Aha, now our opponent our opponent frankly punted here. They took a while to resolve not to resolve the card, but to name their choice with it. I think they were trying to name Clue. I think they wanted us to not be able to activate our clues. Unfortunately, that is not an option. Tokens are not cards. They cannot be named with effects like Pithing Needle. So they just named Tireless Tracker anyway. Bad news for them is that Tireless Tracker does not have any activated abilities. These are both triggered abilities. And, you know, I understand playing this card, trying to name Clue and then realizing you can't. But then you should at least name Field of Ruin or Hissing Quagmire, right? Or is this non-land? Nope, that can name lands, that's right, that's what I thought. So, opponent missed a trick a little bit, but hey, fair enough, it happens. They are going to get in for 2, and as I said, we will not take that block. That was our first damage of the game. Assassin's Trophy's okay. We have better draws, but we're still happy to see just about any kill spell here, because we are going to start pulling so far ahead with double trackers, even if they somehow answer them right now. The fact that we have 2 clues on field means we are already ahead on virtual card advantage. Feels really, really good. So we kind of wanted them to do this. I thought about this and said, hey, if I attack with a tracker, they're probably going to offer the trade with Muda Vault, because they see the Field of Ruin, they know that the Vault is going to be taken care of cleanly one way or the other. They're not low on mana, they have the Ether Vial as a further accelerant, so I expected them to fire up the Vault, and I wanted them to do that because I wanted to use this Fatal Push here cleanly on this turn. I do not expect they're going to expose a Lord next turn, so in the interest of continuing to use my mana as efficiently as possible, I wanted to kind of bait the Muda Vault activation, which feels like a better target than Silvergill Adept for the Fatal Push. They're going to crack in with the Adept. Once more, we can afford to take that hit, because we have this nice painless mana base, and then, boom, Verdant Catacombs right off the top. The literal perfect draw. Feels so good. In response to the activation, they're going to flash in a Trickster. This is going to shut off one of the tracker's abilities, so in response, we'll crack a clue, because we're going to crack a clue this turn no matter what happens. We might as well add our counter, getting underneath the Trickster ability while we can. So both of our trackers have grown. Then the Trickster will resolve, tapping 1 down and taking a clue away from us. But you know, I think we're going to make it. I think we're going to survive that, because we still have 4 clues on board. Tireless Tracker is just an insane, insane card. And so we know they have a Harbinger of Tides, right? We can't really play around this card forever. It has a lot of really juicy targets. Bouncing these trackers is good because they have counters and because they're a 3 mana recast, a little bit clunky. The Tasigur is also a great target for Harbinger of Tides, so it's got all the targets it could ever want. We main phased the Tasigur because we kind of want to try to bait them into holding their Harpy for the Tasigur, because I'd rather just keep my trackers on the field at this point. But they do indeed bounce that attacker. And the reason I chose to attack with it, and also, you know, potentially incentivize them to do that, is because if they already had their heart set on getting a tracker, they would have got this one on the end step anyway. So we might as well take the chance to get in damage, if indeed damage was able to be gotten. I also would certainly not have minded taking a trade there. As good as trackers are, we have all the clues we could ever really need. We have enough clues to put the game away. We just have to keep the board under control now. So that's why I sequenced the way I did. They got a Phantasmal Image, and they copy the Silvergill Adept. Now, when I saw this, I kind of expected them to copy a Harbinger and just really try to tempo us out of the game. Especially because they follow it up with a Lord and an attack. Now, to be fair to them, perhaps they drew the Lord off of the Phantasmal Image, which could very well be the case. That said, it was still a really nice value play regardless, and generally copying an Adept is great in this matchup, but they're just not going to outgrind us. They're just not going to outvalue us. They have to end the game now-ish, or they will not end it at all. And recognizing that, they send in 3 attackers, cracking us for 6, and losing the Trickster to the Tasigur. We draw land. It's a tap land. It's not ideal. And we are, for all the value the trackers have gotten us, our hand is actually still a little bit clunky. We're drawing too many tap lands, too many clunky threats, and we're starting to get a little bit worried about their board and their ability to potentially island walk past us. They just bluff an Ether Vial activation. I suppose that was to kind of try to scare us into cracking a clue. We do not. We'll resolve our Treetop Village, and we want to do this because we want to have the most mana-efficient activation possible with all of the clues around. That's why we played that over another Quagmire. And while they're tapped out, playing around counter magic, we're just going to take away their Lord. We're just going to take away their Lord. There's no need to be too cute here. We just need to make sure that thing gets off the table. A, for Island Walk, and B, so their attacks are a lot less effective. And realizing that if we untap, we're probably going to take over the game pretty emphatically, we just take a turn off of trying to attack, and we just hold the line. So they're starting to flood out a little bit again. They're going to send in their Silvergill Adepts. So they're bluffing a combat trick. Their Vial's on 2, so they could have a 2-mana Lord to Vial in. For that reason, I think with this attack, they want to Vial in the Lord either way. Like, they're committing to going wide. They're committing to these attacks. So for that reason, I'm going to obviously block one with Tasigur, and I'm going to throw my smaller tracker in front of the other one. That might have been a mistake. Maybe I should have blocked with this 4-3 and forced them to have it. But kind of a close call either way, I suppose. They're down to 2 cards in hand, and we're drawing lands, which I suppose is you can never really complain about with a tracker around, but we really need to see some action. Tarmogoyf's okay. It's not the action we want, but it's okay. The fact that it's another blocker means we can get a little bit aggro here with the Tireless Tracker. Opponent's got another Harbinger of Tides. Okay, fair enough. These are some really good cards against us in general. The bounce effects are quite nice. If they had had a little bit of higher threat density, with some more Lords involved, we might be in some decent trouble here. As things are, we just kind of have to leave the tracker in hand and play a Tarmogoyf for the sake of mana efficiency, so we can crack a clue on the end step. These clues are all fantastic, but we're struggling to really churn through them because we are drawing a lot of clunky cards around them. That said, we're still doing quite alright. Our opponent makes yet another land drop. That's good for us. We get to crack a clue. Drawing more lands. There's a piece of cheap interaction. That's what we like to see. Alright, so we want to continue being proactive. So we start out by getting in with our best attacker. Opponent has a thing. We were ready to play around a Lord and some double blocks with a Fatal Push. Instead, they have yet another Harbinger effect. Sure, I mean, you got me. Lots and lots and lots of bounce. But again, they're interacting very well, but they have not quite achieved critical mass in terms of power and the ability to close the game out. Verdant Catacombs is keeping us flush with clues yet again. We're going to main phase 1. We're going to find another Fatal Push. Now we're pretty pretty well insulated against most of their draws. We have all the revolt triggers we could possibly need. So here well, first we crack a clue, just for a little more info. And I was not planning to fatal push, but then I decided to fatal push on the end step. And I chose to target the copy, just because even if they have counter magic, it will automatically be sacrificed. That might have been a mistake, you know, if they counter it, that's obviously fine with me, but this is just the really, really safe play. Like, we have such ungodly amounts of advantage that if we just don't fall behind on board, we're just going to win. So that's the uber safe play there. And of course, I promptly draw the Maelstrom Pulse off the top, and I'm punished for choosing to fire off a fatal push there. That said, I will certainly not complain about this 2-for-1. It does resolve. They have no counter magic, and we are on a 2-turn clock. We're crashing in for 9 here. They've got something out of the vial. It better not be another Harbinger of Tide. Those things are getting quite annoying. It's just a Lord of Atlantis. It came at the wrong time for them. They needed this earlier instead of one of those lands, and then they might have had just enough gas to tempo us out. As things stand, we get to cleanly fatal push this so it doesn't chump us. We're not messing around. We're going to crack a clue this turn no matter what, so we might as well get in an extra point of damage with it. We find a Collective Brutality, which is a fine find. We put them to 7. And here we get to cast a 1-mana Tasigur. Feels alright. We're going to leave a Fatal Push in there because this is kind of our, it's almost unconditional removal against this deck with all these clues around. No downside, unconditional 1-mana instant speed removal seems okay, so that's what we want to leave in the yard for Tassigur's delving fun, but that will not be necessary because our opponent top decks, yet another land. We had an inhuman amount of gas still going. We had a massive board, so they put up a heck of a fight. They had lots of bounce effects. They had a couple cantrips. They were in the game for a while despite our massive amounts of card advantage, just because we could not turn the corner very quickly. We had some clunky stuff. The Tasigur proved to be somewhat clunky. It looked really slick there at the end, but it was a little clunky in the mid game. We didn't find fatal pushes right away. We were leaning more heavily on just trying to block, which against Merfolk is always a little bit dicey, but it got us there. And Tireless Tracker, what more can you say? This card is absolutely bonkers. It might be the best card in this deck. It is certainly in competition with Tarmogoyf for the best green creature ever printed. That's pretty clear in my opinion. Deathrite Shaman would be up there too. If you count Deathrite Shaman in the 1-drop, Goyf in the 2. I think this fine lady takes the crown in the 3-drop slot. You just can't say enough good about her. But anyway, that was a fun match. Matches against Merfolk are surprisingly swingy. I play against this match a lot. A good friend of mine, my most frequent testing buddy, is a Merfolk main, and there are just games where they spreading seas you out of existence. There are games where they present so many permanents that you cannot answer cleanly, like just chaining Silvergill Adepts into each other, and they can tempo you out just by overloading your defenses on one turn and island walking past you. Now, especially post-side, we have, again, a massive pile of interaction for them, but it is by no means an easy matchup. It's a really interesting one. That said, playing against decks like this can be frustrating if you are on Jundar Abzin and your mana's a little bit more clunky. Matchups like Merfolk, while they're not top tier or anything, are just yet more attractions to playing the smooth land base and high mana count and high quantity of utility lands of this particular tracker-centric rock build. The more I play with it, the more I'm convinced that this is where you want to be if you're a BGX deck in Modern. I think Junda's still pretty good. I think Dark Confidant is still pretty good. Abzan is not bringing enough to the table for me at the moment, but man, I truly think this is the best variant. So, thank you all so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate your feedback. If you have any comments to share, I would love to hear them. I read them all because my channel is small, so I'm not inundated with them, and I have time to read them all. It might not last forever, but for now, if you want to yell at me, if you want to make some suggestions, I am all ears. So, until next time, thanks for watching. Have a good night.